Hi, Deanna here. I would like to talk for a second about jewelry and what does the Bible say about people wearing jewelry? I grew up in the United Pentecostal Church, and to some people, this might sound like an odd topic or question, but for someone who has grown up in a group, and there are many groups, it's not just United Pentecostals, that do not allow people to wear jewelry. Depending on what your church believed and your pastor and even your parents, maybe if you were a teenager, it would kind of determine to what degree you wore jewelry. So my first experience with someone really being upset about jewelry was I was in grade 11 and I used to wear a cross necklace to school every day. My parents allowed that. And I had this guy come up to me, this pastor's son who was UPC, and he grabs me right by the necklace, and I can feel it cutting into the back of my neck. And he gets in my face and he's like, "You call yourself a Christian? What are you doing wearing this for?" And I remember I felt like he was going to break it. And I told him, I'm like, "Let go, you're going to break my necklace." I don't know. He felt very passionately about it and apparently had no proper understanding of healthy boundaries. And so he felt emboldened to just grab my necklace. But some of them feel pretty passionate about this stuff. So let's get right into it. What does the Bible say about jewelry? So the two main portions of scripture that they pull this doctrine out of are First Timothy and First Peter. So let's just dive right in. I read from the English Standard Version usually. So First Timothy chapter 2, verse 8. And if you actually start at verse 1, you'll realize that Paul is writing a letter to Timothy to give him advice about public prayer, which I would assume would be any kind of a public gathering or meeting where they held some sort of a prayer service or a prayer meeting. Verse 8, I desire then that in every place the men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. Likewise also that the women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness with good works. So again, these were letters, and you don't see the letters that they received, which could potentially have been asking questions to deal with certain issues that were going on. You just see the letters they sent in response. Paul is telling them about public worship. Men, lift holy hands without anger or quarreling, no debating, no arguing. This was very early on in Christianity, so I'm sure there was lots of debating and heated discussion. So he was just telling them this isn't the place for it, okay? He didn't tell them not to ever debate. And so likewise, also women should adorn themselves with respectable apparel. So he was just telling the women, okay, your public prayer and your public worship place is not the place for you to be decked out to the nines, to put on your fashion show. This is not the place to strut your stuff. You're coming together to worship God, and, you want it to be a respectable thing. You don't want anything taken away from that or becoming the focus. That's all this was. He wasn't saying never ever braid your hair, never ever wear costly attire, never ever wear gold or pearls. He was just saying, don't let that be your focus. Focus on the important thing here. So let's jump to 1 Peter 3, 1 through 6. Here you have Peter sending a letter, and he's given advice to the dispersed Jews who were scattered and living among the Gentiles. And he's telling them, this is marriage advice, actually. The other one was about public prayer. This is marriage advice. He says, likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair, the putting on of gold, jewelry, or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. But all he was saying is you're not going to win your husband by your outward beauty. He didn't say don't be outwardly beautiful and don't fix yourself up, look as bad as you can. He was just saying that's not how you're going to win your unbelieving husband. You're going to win him with your attitude and your respectfulness and your kindness. Makes perfect sense. And then if you read the next verse, it says, "For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord." Funny story. One time when I was a teenager, Dad was kind of irritating Mom. And so he was teasing her. And he said to her, he said, he said, in the Bible, Sarah called Abraham Lord. I think you should start calling me Lord. And without missing a beat, Mom just whips her head around and says, "Well, you accumulate Abraham's wealth and you hire me some maidservants to help out around here, and I just might consider calling you Lord." And I thought that was funny. And people wonder where I get my sassiness. So I thought that was interesting. So as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. So that was our example on how to be a holy, that's how to be a holy woman, to behave like Sarah, and with the whole Abraham thing. Okay. How did Abraham and Sarah feel about all these things? So in Genesis 24, you have Abraham. He's old, he's rich, basically, if you read 24 verse 1. And he asks his servant to go help him find a wife for his son Isaac. He doesn't want to marry one of the Canaanite women. He wants him to marry one of his people from his kindred country. So you skip to verse 10. The servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master. What are these gifts? Well, you skip down and you get to verse 15. He's at the well. Rebecca comes out. Most people know this story. And she's very beautiful. And verse 22, when the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring, which was a nose ring, weighing half a shekel, and 2 bracelets for her arms, weighing 10 gold shekels. Those were the gifts. So Abraham, this is who we're supposed to be patterning ourselves after, Sarah and Abraham. Abraham sent gifts of jewelry to his potential future daughter-in-law, because I'm assuming he knows women love jewelry and it was valuable. And so you can't convince me he sent gifts to his future daughter-in-law and his wife had no jewelry of her own. Not to mention the fact that Sarah was so beautiful that everywhere Abraham went, he got himself in trouble because kings desired her and everybody was wanting her and wanting to marry her. And so he had problems because of her beauty. You can't tell me she was just plain Jane Sarah going around in sackcloth and ashes and not fixing herself up. She was a knockout, which is probably why he was interested in her in the first place. So that would be what would be a reference to that family, Abraham and Sarah, and their attitude towards jewelry. It was considered a gift. More examples of jewelry in the Bible. You got Exodus 3:21 through 22. You got the children of Israel. Moses is telling them, hey, God's going to lead you out of here. And he told me, not only is he going to lead you out, but you're going to plunder the Egyptians, and you're not even going to have to go to war with them. You're going to plunder them by asking them, basically, the women, verse 22 of chapter 3, "But each woman shall ask of her neighbor and any woman who lives in her house for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. And you shall put them on your sons," that's something to think about, "and on your daughters. So you shall plunder the Egyptians." So what you've got is you've got them with this big load of jewelry and clothes. They're not taking it out in a sack. God didn't tell them, don't put it on, put it in a sack. We're going to use it later for things. Wear it out. And to me, that was just so the sons and daughters could look and say, oh, wow, this is the deliverance of our God. And that's exactly what they did. And as far as bling being vanity or prideful or whatever, you've got Exodus 35 talking about the tabernacle instruments. Everything was dipped in gold. Everything was beautiful. It was precious. The breastplate for the priest had 12 gemstones. The high priest had 12 gemstones in it. Revelation 21, you can start at verse 1, but when you hit verse 18, you've got the holy city coming down from God out of heaven, the New Jerusalem, and you've got it decked out to the nines. And it says, like a bride adorned for her husband. And that's actually a very common theme. You'll often hear about brides and adornment as though it's completely normal and just makes perfect sense for a bride to be decked out with jewelry and fancy attire, which is, I mean, how most people do it. If you read verse 18 of Revelation chapter 21, the walls were made of gold. There was all kinds of jewels and stuff. So it doesn't sound to me like God has a problem with bling and stones and precious things. I'll also mention Isaiah 61:10. That's another one where he says that God's clothed me in the garment of salvation and covered me with the robe of righteousness. And it also refers to as a bride adorns herself with jewels. Well, a bride doesn't have a pocket full of jewels. She's wearing her jewels. And so to me, that's just another reference to the whole bride jewelry thing. Luke 15, chapter 15, verses 8 through 10, you have the parable of the lost coin. And so what you have here is you have the lady, she has 10 coins, she's lost a coin, it's a big deal. She sweeps her house till she finds it. When she finally finds it, she calls her neighbors and friends and they rejoice. Why? Well, I mean, she lost a coin. That could be one argument. Another argument is many scholars believe that it was actually her 10 coin dowry. And so in those times, what they would have is they would have this 10 coin dowry, which was very valuable. I mean, these were real coins. And they were on a rope and they would wear them around their head, with the coins hanging down. And you've probably seen it in movies and stuff with the little coins hanging down. And they would wear it as jewelry, and that was their dowry. And it was great because should they ever have need, they could use it to help the household. So my last portion of scripture, to just talk about how God feels about jewelry, would be Ezekiel 16, and it's verses 1 through 14. And he's talking about Israel, and he's very hurt that Israel's not honoring the covenant they made with him. And so this is an allegory. This is not a real story, but this is an allegory of how he felt. Let me just read it. Again, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, make known to Jerusalem her abominations and say, thus says the Lord God to Jerusalem, your origin and your birth are of the land of the Canaanites, and your father was an Amorite and your mother a Hittite. And as for your birth, on the day you were born, your cord was not cut, nor were you washed with water to cleanse you, nor rubbed with salt, nor wrapped in swaddling clothes. So basically saying nobody cared about you. You were thrown out into a field and no one bothered with you. Verse 8, when I passed by you again, I saw you, and behold, you are at the age for love. I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness. I made my vow to you and entered into a covenant with you, declares the Lord, and you became mine. Then I bathed you with water, anointed you with oil, clothed you with embroidered cloth, shod you with leather, so that would be shoes, wrapped you in fine linen, covered you with silk. Sounds pretty nice. Verse 11, and I adorned you with ornaments. This is the interesting part. And put bracelets on your wrists and a chain on your neck. And I put a ring on your nose and earrings in your ears and a beautiful crown on your head. Thus you were adorned with gold and silver. Your clothing was of fine linen and silk. And then it just goes on to talk about how beautiful Israel was as a bride. And so again, it's an allegory, but it does seem like a really odd picture for God to paint for us of how he felt about Israel as his bride. If jewelry was taboo, to me, it just completely sounds as though jewelry were a beautiful romantic gift, like that was a commonly known thing, and that it was meant to be given to somebody that you love, and it was valuable. And so I just don't buy the whole jewelry's evil and bad and promotes vanity. I think jewelry is beautiful, it's sentimental. You know, if you don't want to wear jewelry, well, of course, nobody cares. You don't have to wear jewelry. Not everybody's into jewelry, but there are a lot of people out there that are following a bunch of man-made rules where scriptures have been taken out of context and they don't want to follow them. Like I can remember growing up and I loved jewelry. I would have loved to have gotten my ears pierced when I was in school, but I was never allowed to. And so I was 27 years old when I got my ears pierced, if you can imagine. And there's many other verses. I could be here all evening if I wanted to be, just showing all the verses where there are mentions of jewelry in a positive light in the Bible. So this idea, so some people will say, well, it's vanity. Well, lots of things are vanity. I mean, we have to have a little bit of pride to it to a certain extent, or you wouldn't brush your teeth and comb your hair. And so, I mean, how is it any more vanity or useless than, say, the ugly old lady brooches I saw people wearing to church all the time when I wasn't allowed to get my ears pierced, or, you know, all the weird big flowers and the fancy things they wear in their hair, which I don't have a problem with any of that stuff. But I'm just saying, from the vanity logic Fashion scarves. I mean, other than a winter scarf to keep you warm, a fashion scarf would be wrong. That would promote vanity. Let's talk about neckties. What is the purpose of a necktie in a suit? It serves no purpose other than decorative. And again, I have no problem with neckties. The pocket squares. You can't tell me anybody's going to whip one of them out of their pocket after they're so carefully folded and blow their nose on it. No, they're reaching inside of their coat and they're getting a hanky for that. The crazy pattern dress socks men wear. I mean, these are all matters of personal style and expression and vanity to an extent. And there's nothing wrong with any of them, just the same as there's nothing wrong with jewelry. We always used to joke that whoever came up with this jewelry doctrine was just a cheapskate, and especially the ones who didn't believe in wedding rings. They were just too cheap to buy their woman a diamond. So I don't know. It is crazy. I guess it goes back to healthy boundaries again. How far are you going to let people go dictating your life to you? Just because somebody's personal choices and preferences lead them to feel a certain way about something does not make it biblical doctrine. It just makes it a personal conviction to them, which they're certainly entitled to. But it certainly is nothing that you have to go by. And so I would encourage you, look up scriptures about jewelry. If your heart is set on something like that, go for it. If you come to the conclusion that jewelry is fine and the Bible's very positive about jewelry, go for it. And as far as you people who are pushing your personal convictions on other people, minding your own business goes a long way in this world. And you need to stop nitpicking people, because at some point, your little personal rules that you're trying to exalt and make into a doctrine can cause you to fall into spiritual pride, because you're going to feel so much better than everyone else because you've come up with 100 different little rules that people need to go by. And that's not ever what God intended. So anyway, again, you don't have to agree with me. Just search it out for yourself.